Can get started now. So hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. And this is the Paurugai Dialogues on Food and Culture for Community Building. My name is Emiko Morita, and I'm the Executive Director of Powell Street Festival Society. I'm third generation Japanese Canadian. My maternal grandparents are English. They settled in rural Ontario, the territories of Mississauga, Ottawa, and Anishinaabe in the early 20th century. My Japanese Jichan and Bachan ran restaurants on Alexander Street and Powell Street in the 1920s and 30s prior to their forced removal in 1942. My father was born in Greenwood during the internment, and I was born and raised in Vancouver, the unceded territories of the Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, and Musqueam peoples. I'm grateful for their stewardship of this land and water and all its creatures. Through my work at Powell Street Festival and in my daily life, I strive to be accountable as a settler colonizer and to center Indigenous knowledge and teachings as I grapple with my own legacy of dispossession. Working in the downtown Paurugai, I see many First Nations and Métis people experiencing hardships. I witness the impact of discrimination and abuse, erasure of language and cultural knowledge. I learn about the precarious living and labor conditions for agricultural migrant workers. During this pandemic, Powell Street Festival's community care program has supported the distribution of necessities of life, such as clean drinking water and healthy meals, to vulnerable people in the downtown East Side. Today, we're talking about food and culture and how we nourish ourselves and our communities. Please consider the food that you've eaten today. Who grew it? On whose land? What journey it has taken to get to your plate and into your belly. Reflect upon the socioeconomic and cultural assumptions embedded with everything you consume. Also, I think you'll agree that this pandemic has helped us appreciate the joy and warmth we can experience when coming together to share a meal. An online dialogue pales in comparison, but welcome to the table. The series is possible thanks to financial support from Hapa Collaborative, SFU's David Lamb Centre, Canada Council for the Arts, BC Arts Council, City of Vancouver, individual donors, and in-kind support from the Bulletin and Element IQ. Before we get started, some housekeeping notes. We're recording the guest presentations. These will be available on Powell Street's YouTube channel. You can turn off your camera if you wish to remain private. There is a Q&A right after the panelists' presentation. Please use the chat box to ask questions. Also, I want to stress our priority today is to hear from everybody during the breakout groups. We're inviting you into a circle, but we have contextual and technological constraints. So we've asked the facilitators in each group to be a bit tough with time management, and we apologize in advance. Should you wish to share more thoughts after the event concludes, we've set up a discussion page on Facebook. You'll find it on the Paurugai Dialogues event page. Now, Erica, our host. Erica Hiroko Isumura. She's our guest facilitator today. She is Yonsei Japanese and Chinese Canadian writer. Erica edited Our Edible Roots, the Japanese Canadian Kitchen Garden with Tonari Gumi Gardeners, and is a member of Kikiai Collaborative, organized Ensoku, a food, art, and culture event for Japanese, Canadian, and American youth. She's been involved with urban agriculture and food justice projects in Seattle, Victoria, and Vancouver. Erica, let's welcome Erica.
Hi, everyone. It's nice to see so many familiar faces and names. I am just going to share my screen. Let's see. This into presentation mode. Just one sec. Present. Great. So thank you so much, Emmy, for that introduction today for our event on food and culture for community building. I'm really excited to be hosting today and introducing our special guests, Kage, Carmel, and Ingrid, who are all brilliant and have really wonderful stories to share with us. As Emmy mentioned, my name is Erica Hiroko, and today I'm joining this event from a hill perched in New Westminster on the unceded land of Hulkaminam and Squamish-speaking peoples, who've cared for these lands and waters since time immemorial. So particularly where I live, I can see the Fraser River, and that is going to be where I'm going to start our event today. I'm also actually just going to ask, before I move forward, if folks haven't muted themselves, just to do are presenting, so we don't hear feedback, and so don't get background noise, which I'm kind of getting right now. Okay, hopefully that'll subside. So the Fraser is known as the Stolo in Hulkaminam language, and it's a river that is significant culturally, geographically, and has been a food source for Indigenous communities since time immemorial, who continue to harvest and trade its salmon today. For folks who are joining us outside of BC, this is the largest river on the west coast of Canada, and historically considered the greatest salmon producing river in the world. Less than 10 years ago, a run of over 2 million wild sockeye salmon traveled along this river, and both salmon and the Fraser River have been deeply significant to the Japanese Canadian community on the West Coast. So in my family, my great-grandfather immigrated from Iwate Prefecture in northern Japan. And as you can see here on this wartime registration card, he worked and lived at the cannery in Prince Rupert as a fisherman before the internment of the Second World War. In the Japanese Canadian community, the story is commonly known: the anti-Asian racism, the uprooting during the war, family separation, having homes, boats, and livelihoods taken away. The internment or incarceration years of the Second World War is very much what has shaped our community. This photo was taken on the Fraser River in 1949, right before the government of Canada sold off these fishing boats that they had unjustly confiscated. Salmon and the Stolo are major parts of the Japanese Canadian origin story. Many of our ancestors fished these coastal waterways, worked in the canneries, and used food as a means of connecting to culture and homelands. So when I first started to work on putting this event together for Powell Street Festival, I emailed a large group of my friends and family, and I invited them to send me a photo of a food memory. So pictured here are photos. You can see my friend Sheila sent me a photo with a traditional Indonesian mortar and pestle. And she shared that a few years ago, she began to learn to make traditional foods from Indonesia when she was missing her family and missing home, but she was unable to leave Canada for immigration reasons. My friend Lisa shares photos of ingredients for vegetarian chow mein that she cooked during the first year she wasn't able to return to Toronto to celebrate the New Year with her family. In the Japanese Canadian community, New Year's Day is a huge celebration. And on the right, my friend Emmy sent me a photo from a trip pre-pandemic to Japan, which is where her dad's family lives and is from. So these photos remind me that food can often bring up memories of childhood, home, family, and the many places that we come from or have traveled to. Food can also remind us of our care for one another and for the land. On the top left, I have a photo from my friend Hiromi, who has been volunteering at Uminami Farm on Vancouver Island each week. Some of the vegetables from a harvest recently. On the bottom left is a photo of sukiyaki taken by my cousin Jessie, which is prepared by our Auntie Fran. In the middle, we have a roadside vegetable stand in Okinawa, sent to me from my friend Jeff. And on the top right is a photo of my friend's dad eating a piece of sugar cane, which he hadn't eaten in 40 years. And my friend's partner's mom had bought it from T&T because it was a snack she remembered from her childhood in rural China. She lovingly had shared it with Christy's family, even though it is so hard to find here and only sold during the Lunar New Year. These photos remind me that food is deeply related to our history. It can offer us a wellness that is not just personal to us as individuals, but also intergenerational and spanning time and place. It can affect our emotional, physical, and our mental well-being. However, as much as there is a lot of celebratory and positive aspects of food, it can also bring up feelings of shame, scarcity, and division. The truth is that we live in a society that often tells us that certain foods are good and others are bad, which casts judgment not only on our choices or lack thereof, but also on our bodies and our autonomy. History has showed us that food can be used as a means of dominance and control. Today, we don't all have access to healthy foods or affordable foods. And in Canada, there remains to be a disproportionate impact of food insecurity in the north, where more people, particularly Inuit, are required to live off the land. As climate change increases, their food sources are being even more severely affected. All this to say that food is political. It is not neutral. So just going back to that river that I mentioned, the Fraser River, the Stolo. As I've mentioned, less than 10 years ago, over 2 million sockeye salmon traveled home along this river, making the long journey back from the mouth. So you can see kind of the tip of the yellow, all the way back up into Secwepemc territories in the BC interior. It's a very long journey. And spawning, reaching many other spawning grounds kind of along the way. However, this past year in 2020, the Department of Fisheries and Oceans Canada estimated that the return of sockeye to the Stolo was 283,000, possibly one of the lowest in sockeye salmon, possibly one of the lowest returns of sockeye salmon in our history. And there's a lot to be said about the reasons for this decline, whether it's poor policy decisions, corporate interests, fish farms, environmental degradation. But the truth of the matter is that for many years, Indigenous people in Canada have been leading conversations that explicitly name how the well-being of the land is intricately connected to culture and the well-being of people, particularly highlighting the relationship between natural resource extraction and missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit individuals, which is one of the reasons why each year on February 14th, we gather in the downtown east side to march and to remember. I feel really lucky that right before the pandemic broke out, I was able to walk alongside many elders in our Japanese Canadian community on those streets. And all this to say that these are not just environmental issues alone, but they are also issues of food sovereignty and of human rights. And I want to mention this because most recently, this past week in downtown Vancouver, a group of Indigenous youth led peaceful actions rooted in ceremony to ask corporations like AIG Insurance to back out of supporting the Trans Mountain Pipeline, which is currently set to expand by digging a tunnel beneath the Fraser River, which will undoubtedly affect the salmon. As part of this, they will also be cutting down thousands of trees, removing crucial wildlife, bird, fish habitat around Colony Farm in Coquitlam, Hume Park in New West, and Brunette River and Stony Creek in Burnaby, as all this oil travels up Burnaby Mountain and down to the Bird Inlet.
And with your dad here, we'll help keep it clean and healthy. We're happy, by the way. Hi, we got you.
Just a reminder for folks to stay on mute, please, till we're done, until there's time to chat. So this past week, acts of ceremony were met with violence by the police against this group of youth. And I think it's important to name this because one of the goals of the Power of God dialogue session is really to bring these complex issues to light and talk about our role and our responsibility as Japanese Canadian Community Plus. And I add the plus because there's many people here today who are part of many overlapping communities. As well, the festival every year is hosted by the Japanese Canadian community, but welcomes people from all walks of life to participate in the free festivities. So today we really are here to think about how we can move into and create a future beyond the pandemic. So as we hear from our guests today and others in the Paurugai series, we'll really be learning about how many of these different issues, whether they're social or environmental or cultural, are really deeply interconnected. So to be honest, if we were having this event in person and it wasn't during a pandemic, I would really require that we would be having all of these conversations over a shared meal. In my experience of organizing community events, food is so crucial to bringing people together. As Emmy mentioned, in 2019, I helped to organize an event for Japanese Canadian and Japanese American young people called Insoku, which included activities like folding dumplings, sharing izakaya, eating snacks in Chinatown, and even taking a trip to Steveston where we shared fish and chips. This was a really great way to bring people together for the first time, but also to have challenging conversations around community, culture, much like we're having today.
No. I'll go to the room in a second.
So all in all, food remains to be a very complex topic with many different facets. Sometimes our traditions don't quite look like those of our ancestors. Pictured here is a photo of Mayu and Leslie eating and making chow mein sandwiches, taken by my sister Kayla. And on the right is a photo of myself with spam musubi, taken by my friend Elisa during one of the first years that I volunteered at the Pal Street Festival. So today we are hearing from 3 individuals who connect with food in different ways. Our guests will each have 7 minutes to talk about their own personal experiences, whether this is learning to grow Japanese vegetables and herbs, bringing people together over food across cultural or faith traditions, or thinking about the migrant farm workers who grow the food that so many of us purchase at the grocery store. Afterwards, there will be a question and answer period. I've prepared a few questions, but also I would encourage you to please write down any questions that come up for you as you listen to our speakers, so you can share them later in the chat. And afterwards, we will be breaking out into groups to share stories and discussion. Then we'll reconvene all together. And after we wrap up the event, there will be space for people to hang out and chat casually if you'd like, where everyone can have their mics turned on and we can share conversation. But of course, that's optional. So to begin this conversation, the first guest we'll be hearing from today is Kage. I was lucky enough to get to know Kage by volunteering with the Tanarigumi Gardening Club, where they've led the Red Shiso project for the past few years. Kage is a taiko artist who is also active in land-based work. Since the 1980s, they have co-founded several taiko and music groups. They've toured internationally and created various works that push the boundaries of form. Over the last decade, they have been training and practicing various land-based work, which includes edible and medicinal mushroom cultivation, soil building, bioremediation, urban beekeeping, and permaculture design. Please welcome Kage. I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody, for inviting me. Pal Street Festival for inviting me. My name is Kage, and my pronouns are she, they, or he. Better just to ask me if you want to know. I am queer, gender non-binary, settler of Japanese ancestry, happa, hafu, or double, taiko playing, AV technician, community gardener, and right now with my siblings, I'm the main supporter for my elderly parents. I have been living and thriving as an uninvited guest on the unceded and ancestral territories of the Coast Salish peoples, including the Musqueams, the Homish, and Tsleil-Waututh people since 1975, when my family immigrated from Japan. I've been involved with the Pal Street Festival since the late 1970s and with the taiko community since the early 1980s. I will focus my talk on the garden club, on the community gardening and some activities of Tanarigumi Garden Club, specifically the Red Shiso project. Okay. I had no particular interest in gardening until about 10 years ago, when I became good friends with someone who had dug up a certain corner of Crab Park. Some of you may know Laurel Irons, who is a Kuapa community acupuncturist. She did this to create a garden, a guerrilla garden. At first, I was like, why would anybody want to do this? But eventually I understood, and I slowly started to take an interest in gardening and growing food myself. I got involved with the Elizabeth Rogers Community Garden in Mount Pleasant and joined the Tonarigumi Garden Club as they got their own community plot at the same time. Tonarigumi is a grassroots community organization that began in 1974, serving the Japanese Canadian seniors and other members of the community. Although the garden club's original intention was to grow foods to provide for the Tonarigumi lunch program, we primarily focused on teaching each other and researching how to grow and cook with Japanese vegetables and herbs. Over a couple of growing seasons, some very skilled and enthusiastic members joined the group, comprised of primarily Japanese Canadian seniors, youth, and a few of us in between. We offered community workshops on Japanese vegetables and herbs, how to grow, cook, and eat together. These events attracted a wide range of folks outside the Tonarigumi community. It also strengthened our knowledge of food specific to our Japanese Canadian culture. Seasonally, the club would hold our own dinner parties where we would share our various foods. These photos show one of our largest gatherings when we collaborated with the Uminami Organic Farm for an oden and daikon party. To note, the Tonarigumi Garden Club produced the book, Our Edible Roots, which Erica was an editor for. The Red Shiso Project. Red Shiso tea is a traditional drink that one would rarely see available commercially anywhere that was made from red shiso leaves. The daughter of Garden Club member Mariko Takashina fondly told of a red shiso beverage her grandmother made in Japan. Inspired by this memory, we grew red shiso and experimented making a syrup-based beverage. It was delicious, refreshing, antioxidant rich, and we wanted to make it enough to be available for the Tonarigumi food booth at the Powell Street Festival. However, the volume needed to make enough would require community support. Thus began the Red Shiso Project. We put out a call in the JCCA bulletin through our various personal garden contacts and all our friends to invite folks to adopt red shiso seedlings in the spring until harvest time in late summer. It was clear to many of us that this was a community building project. We welcomed folks to adopt as little as one plant, 10 or more. The idea was to engage the community, however small each contribution may be. In the first years, we had approximately 50 participants annually, mostly wanting to adopt shiso plants, with a few people offering to donate their own plants already growing in their garden. These included a 90-year-old Mrs. Miyamoto and another elder, Jackie Kadura. At the end of summer, we harvested all the adopted red shiso plants, and over a couple of 5-hour work parties, we processed shiso syrup to be frozen and stored until the following festival. Flashback to midsummer. The syrup created from the previous year was available for Powell Street Festival. For the last couple of years, although I pulled back from the project, it continues to grow exponentially. I just got the stats from Makiko, who reports that in 2019, over 9 local home growers and West Coast Seeds contributed over 15,500 grams of red shiso leaves that club members processed into a total of 68.5 liters of red shiso syrup concentrate. I believe this is stored in a freezer somewhere since 2020 festival sales did not happen due to COVID. This concludes the red shiso portion of my talk. I want to bring us back to the community garden for a moment. You can see we generally have a great time. However, we cannot get away from our capitalist and colonial structures and attitudes. Last summer, via an email list with the community garden, photos of 2 racialized people were circulated with a message saying, "These individuals have been seen stealing from the garden." A few members, including myself, were disturbed by the shaming nature of this message and worked towards creating a free box for the garden. Also, the shaming was occurring while COVID anti-Asian violence was rampant. I felt very protective of the Tonarigumi Garden Club members at the Elizabeth Rogers Community Garden and wrote back expressing this concern, but nothing much happened to remedy this. Theft and vandalism are common complaints in all community gardens. A couple of summers ago at the garden, theft was rampant for several days. Finally, we saw who it was. This cute bunny was eating everything. The grumpiest gardeners would get in the best of moods when they saw the bunny and just loved this little bunny. And one day it disappeared. The outlaw bunny put a few things into perspective for me, which brings me to the next slide, which helps to imagine an alternative model for community gardens. In 2010, Dean Jackson, a longtime community organizer and master gardener, started Hilltop Urban Gardens. HUG is a community-based urban agriculture justice and equity organization in Tacoma, Washington. Despite all the open produce growing in the neighborhood, they very rarely experience theft or vandalism. I believe this is because they engage the community and do a weekly farm stand they call Hug Grub that provides for 20 to 30 households each week, plus a weekly food pantry at a neighborhood church. Here is a quote from Hug's Facebook page. "We seek to inspire our community to live with abundance while understanding and interrupting the root cause of economic poverty and wealth accumulation and systems of oppression. We believe growing our own food independence is an important strategy in this process. Food is a basic human right. Everyone deserves access and the ability to produce and distribute fresh, affordable, healthy, clean, sustainable, safe, and culturally appropriate foods. We call this food justice," end quote. I would like to end this presentation with a question. What are ways we can restructure the community garden model to shift from this ownership, theft, feedback loop, or sinkhole we seem to find ourselves in? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kage, for sharing that. It provides, all of this is providing great food for thought. Our second guest that we'll be hearing from is Carmel Tanaka. And Carmel is a queer Japanese woman of color from Vancouver on the unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. Her mother is Ashkenazi Israeli, and her father is a Sansei Japanese Canadian. Her parents taught her the importance of social justice and bringing people together through food. Carmel is a community engagement professional who founded the cross-cultural walking tours in Strathcona, JQT Vancouver, Genocide Prevention BC. She spearheads a monthly Zoom call for Japanese people, that's Jewish and Japanese, and was recently named one of 7 LGBTQ+ Jews of color you should know. Carmel is a past Human Rights Committee Chair and board member of JVJCCA, NAJC's BC Redress Community Advisor, Kikiai Collab's sponsorship co-chair, and currently serves as the Vancouver Asian Film Festival's Eliminate Hate Community Engagement Director. So please welcome Carmel.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to share my screen here. Make sure I pick the right one. Is this the right one? Let's hope so. There we go. Okay. Hello and shalom. My name is Carmel Isla Tanaka, and I am calling in from Vancouver on the unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. I'm committed to doing the work of growing to right relationship with the people who have lived here since time immemorial and with the land itself. Professionally, as Erica has said, I am a community engagement professional and my work is deeply personal. So let's dive in. So on the left is my mom, Dalia Gottlieb. She's a first-generation Ashkenazi Israeli. On the right is my dad, Mineo Tanaka. He's a Sansei, third-generation Japanese Canadian, which makes me a Yonsei, a fourth generation. These photos are circa 1975, long before I came along, but having a Jewish and a Japanese Canadian family, I identify as Japanese. This is a photograph of my Japanese Canadian and Jewish grandparents meeting for the first time. Again, this is before I was born. I wish I was here to have witnessed this occasion. I eventually came along in '87. Recently, I've been hanging out with my parents in the Okanagan and going through family albums, so you get a chance to see me. And I was lucky enough to be able to meet 3 of my grandparents. Unfortunately, I lost them pretty young by the time I came around. And there are questions that I definitely would have wished I had the opportunity to ask them, particularly in regards to the Japanese Canadian internment and the Holocaust, respectively. That being said, these traumas have greatly informed the social justice work that I do today. And one of the hats that I wear is founder of Genocide Prevention BC. And again, as Erica said, I'm the Community Engagement Director of the Eliminate Hate campaign over at the Vancouver Asian Film Festival. Okay, we're gonna fast forward 33 years. That is the age I am today. And here I am with my folks. This is a totally normal scene for us. Not the fact that it's my dad's big 75, which was super awesome and great. And mom also turned 70 recently. Shout outs to them if they're on the call here today. But I just want to draw our attention to the table. We have my mom's Jewish coffee cake. We've got dorayaki Japanese manju pancakes. We've got genmai cha tea, and it's Hanukkah. I think it's the 6th night of Hanukkah as well. And to me, this is totally normal. Now, both of my parents are fantastic cooks, and thankfully these skills have trickled down to me as well. I was invited to share our family's recipes for Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah is the Jewish New Year, and it's celebrated in the fall. And I was invited by Bechol Lashon, which in Hebrew means in every language. And their mission is to strengthen Jewish identity by raising awareness about the ethnic, racial, and cultural diversity of the Jewish identity and experience. Now, this holiday, typically you're supposed to eat fish. So naturally in my family, we were serving salmon teriyaki. I eventually, as I got older, I started to incorporate some new traditions and added to the menu a miso maple orange zested trout. And this was published in 2019, and it sparked a pretty big conversation, not only about fusion recipes that are in the Jewish community and how people are fusing their identities together for food on the table, but it also helped me connect with other people who are Japanese. One of these lovely people is Kristen Eriko Posner of Nourish Co. And eventually we would become friends and co-founders of a monthly Japanese call with Japanese people and their families from all over the world. Turns out we're not alone, which is really awesome because a lot of us grow up thinking we are. The month of May, by the way, is both a celebration of Jewish Heritage Month and Asian Heritage Month. So it was super natural for us to come together and celebrate our identities. Now, with permission, I stole Kristen's idea to add pureed kabocha squash into the challah and put it into my challah recipe. Now, I was taught how to make challah, which is the Jewish braided bread you typically eat at the Shabbos dinner table, by the one and only Robbie McConnell, former editor of the Montreal Gazette. He was not Jewish, but he was married to a lovely Jewish person. And I ended up naming this new challah a kabo challah. Now, this recipe began to spread like wildfire, and I heard things like, oh my God, you got into Haggadot.com. I did not know what this was beforehand, but apparently that means you made it in the Jewish cuisine world. I got featured in John Endo Greenaway's Miso Soup for the Soul in the Gepo Bulletin, representing the Japanese Canadian community. And it's really great to not only see that John and Emiko are on the call right now, because they're also part of our growing Japanese clan. Now, I was invited to do workshops by local synagogues, and that was really interesting. I had never done a cooking lesson before, but it was really awesome. And I actually started to make this bread. This bread started to pop up all over the place. One of the projects that Eric has said I do is the cross-cultural walking tours, which happens during the month of May. And if you remember, that's Jewish and Asian Heritage Month. So I figured, you know, we're bringing together storytellers from many different communities that call Strathcona home. So why not offer Kabo Challah at snack time? Then the greatest form of flattery of all time happened when another member of our Japanese group, Lauren Sasaki Schreiber, took my Kabo Challah and instead of braiding it, got inspired from another Jewish baker and turned them into pumpkin-shaped chalot. Isn't it beautiful? I mean, like, she's a professional, so it's like, yeah, it's great. Now, in 2020, so a year later, Bechol Lashon came back to me again and asked me to whip up a recipe for Shavuot, a Jewish harvest festival where you typically eat dairy, like cheese blintzes and cheesecake. Forget the fact that we're all lactose intolerant. Anyway, I took my mom's recipe for a Jewish 3-layered cheesecake where you've got the graham cracker on the bottom, the dense cream cheese filling in the middle, and then the super light sour cream layer on top. And she got that recipe from Ruti, an American Jew who probably got it from her mom, who probably got it from her mom. And I mean, like, it's passed down the generations. So I tweaked it and I added, you guessed it, matcha powder to the cream cheese filling. And this was during quarantine and I was with my parents. So it was quite the family activity. And you have my mom dictating to me that how to make the cheesecake. And my dad was tasked with making a stencil of the Jewish Star of David so I could decorate the cake. So I absolutely love the wabi-sabi-ness of our collaboration. This article ended up accompanying a call out to Japanese people announcing that there's a monthly call, and if anyone would like to join, to please contact me. I started to get lots of inquiries from Japanese people, all saying that they thought they were the only ones. Turns out there's more of us than we all thought, and we connect over Zoom and talk about all things Japanese, things that we could never share in Jewish or Japanese community. Many of us are active in bringing diversity, inclusion, and accessibility to the table in our respective communities and support one another in our efforts. Now, little did I know that this recipe would be shared all over the world. And months down the line, I would get a photo from a Jewish cousin of mine in Melbourne, Australia, saying that his girlfriend had seen the recipe and that she was making my matcha cheesecake recipe. Now, I get a lot of people sending me pictures of recipes that they're trying of mine. Here are kabocha challahs that recently came out of Vancouver from 2 people who also are part of the Japanese community. And one of them is a queer Japanese person. So speaking of queer, I am the founder and executive director of JQD Vancouver, the Jewish queer trans nonprofit of Vancouver. And our mission is to queer Jewish space and to Jewify queer space. And one of the ways that we have done this is by queering Jewish food in Jewish space. Now, here's a picture of me tabling at the Jewish Community Center. I'm selling rainbow chalot, which is the braided bread again. And this is happening on a busy Friday morning. There's a reason why I chose Friday morning. Later that evening would be Shabbat, the Sabbath, the Jewish day of rest. And we sold in under 2 hours, and 40 Jewish households that night had a rainbow challah on their Shabbos dinner table. Another example is selling rainbow sprinkled hamantashen, these triangular cookies, for the Jewish holiday of Purim, which is the gayest Jewish holiday and is embraced by LGBTQ Jews worldwide as our holiday, and it was just yesterday. We tabled again at the Jade to promote Purim Drag story time at the Jewish Public Library, and again, we sold out. I also was selling rainbow-inspired tsumami zaiku fabric flowers to weave in my Japanese identity, which together with the hamantashen sent a beautiful and proud message that said, LGBTQ Jews and Jews of color exist. We are here, we are Jewish, we're also super gay, and we're not going anywhere, and happy holidays. Thank you to Powell Street Festival for inviting me to speak on behalf of all the work that I do and how I use food and culture to build community and ultimately positively fuel collective resilience. You can find me on all the socials. Domo arigato, toda raba, thank you.
Thank you, Carmel. It's so great to hear your own stories about bringing different communities together across food, thinking about ways that we're cooking food, but also thinking about Kage stories and ways that we're growing foods together and making those spaces more inclusive and accessible as well. I think all of this is really great as well, thinking about our next guest, who is our final guest that we're hearing from today. I'm really pleased to introduce Ingrid Mendez. Ingrid is the Executive Director of Watari Counseling and Support Services Society. Before taking up the role in 2018, she served as Watari's Latin American drug and alcohol counselor for 20 years. A lifelong volunteer, she brought her commitment to inclusivity and social justice with her from Guatemala, place of many trees, to Turtle Island in 1990. When she arrived in Vancouver, she saw the need for supportive networks between newcomers like herself and existing communities in her new home. She started building relationships that, over 2 decades later, remain integral to the supportive programming at Watari in the downtown east side. Welcome, Ingrid.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay, perfect. My screen was saying something else there. Thank you very much for inviting me. And I feel very honored to be here with you today. As Erika said, my name is Ingrid. I'm from Guatemala, from the Maya Quiche territories in the northwest of the country. Came here as a refugee in 1991. Trying to save the life of my partner, lifelong partner, and myself. So I had to leave the country, and I'm joining today from the stolen unceded territories of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam nations. And although they didn't have a say on me landing here as a refugee, I'm very thankful to them for allowing me to do this work, but I'm also very thankful for the resistance that they continue to have against colonization and against invasion. Just as the resistance that our people have in our country and in many countries of the world. So today, thank you again for allowing me to do this. I'm gonna try to see if I can share my screen. I'm not very good at this thing, so please bear with me for a minute here. I'm gonna see if I can do this. I think I can. Can you see it now? Yeah, okay, perfect. So I'm just gonna see. There we go. Okay, so just reiterating that we are on Indigenous land, and people have been resisting here colonization for more than 500 years and continue to do so. And as migrants, we have a moral obligation to respect and recognize that we are on their lands, and consequently stand in solidarity with their struggle in defending their lands and territories, and we must respect culture, traditions, and ceremonies. And we share the same struggles in our countries, and we stand together in solidarity with Indigenous struggles for self-determination. And I work for Watari, an organization in the downtown east side. Watari was founded in 1986. The word Watari, I believe, was stolen by our funder, the executive director back then. But Watari, and I apologize to the Japanese community for that, because I'm sure she didn't ask for permission to use this word. Watari is also a word in Quechua that means connection, and was also the material that the Quechua people used to build bridges. So we recently had a Quechua woman who came to us and said, it's great that you have this word as the name of your organization, because it pretty much reflects what Watari does, connection and really connecting us together in different languages and cultures. So very thankful to her as well for giving us permission to use the word in Quechua. So today I want to talk to you about agricultural migrant workers. And agricultural migrant workers come here every year. Before the pandemic, about 10,000 workers came to British Columbia. And during the pandemic, I believe it has been about 5,000. So half of the workers have been coming to the province. They, when they come here, they are dealing with very low wages, long hours, no breaks, lots of abuse, physical, emotional, sometimes even sexual abuse that they experience. So most of the reason for this is because their work permit is tied to the workplace where they come to work, to the farmer. The owner of the farmer has a lot of power on them. So it's very difficult for them to assert workplace rights when they are in a situation like that, where they are tied to this farm and they cannot leave. They are afraid to leave. They are afraid to speak about the abuse they are experiencing because they know that the farmer has the power to say, if you say something, I'm not going to bring you back next year, or I can send you back to your country. And we have seen that many times where people have had connected with supports and say, this is going on, this is happening to me, and there's a complaint, and the farmer next day, they have them on the plane going back to their country. So lots of power over them and over what they do. So there's no safety regulations in the workplace. They are excluded from protections, workplace protections. They do lots of overtime, and they basically have little or no access to healthcare. When they arrive to the province, they have to wait 3 months to access healthcare because they are also they also fall in the 3-month wait that the government of British Columbia has for everybody who moves to the province. And when you move from another province to BC, you have to wait 3 months before your healthcare coverage kicks in. But these 3 months, you are covered by the province healthcare where you're coming from. With agricultural migrant workers, that doesn't happen because they are coming from their countries to help us produce the food that we eat, to help us feed our families and our communities. And unfortunately, they don't have any other coverage. So they have to wait 3 months. And during those 3 months, they experience a lot of stress. Of course, you leave your family behind, you leave your community, you leave your country behind. So there's a lot of stress, there's a lot of sadness. In many cases, they have families, and especially the little ones don't understand why mom or dad had to leave. And so many times they are very confused and they think that mom and dad are abandoning them. And this causes the workers a lot of anxiety. And so many times they get sick and there is no coverage to help. So this is a house where women, agricultural migrant workers, were living in. As you can see, it's a really bad housing. These women were being forced to work 16 hours a day, little breaks or no breaks. They were in extremely bad conditions. The farmer did not care for their health, for their safety. They started experiencing some breathing issues too, because as you can see, the house is really, really bad. Yeah, it was a really extreme, difficult situation for them. Finally, they were able to speak about it. They found the strength to speak about it, and we supported them in moving to another farm. But it's, as you can see, this is the experience that most agricultural migrant workers face with living conditions and with workplace conditions. So what we do, oh, there we go. So with Watari, we were able to support workers during the quarantine last year. And these are a group of workers just staying around in one of the parks close to the hotels where they were staying. We're not doing that work anymore, but we were very happy to connect. We connected with about 4,000 workers. And because of that connection, we were able to support about 150 workers making complaints to WCB, because we took this opportunity of connecting with them during the quarantine to talk to them about their rights, to talk about what they could do to denounce what they experience every day in the farms where they go to. So it was a really, I'm very, very proud of my coworkers who help us doing this, and all the community members who help us supporting the workers during this this quarantine, and really sharing with the workers their passion and also their knowledge on how they could they could reach out to us if they were experiencing abuse. And this is a partnership we do with BC Libre, a group of students at UBC that fix bikes, and they give them to us. We bring them to farms, to the workers every year. And this is a great tool for the workers, because a lot of them, they live in farms that are completely isolated, and the farmer, the owner of the farm, will not give them any means of transportation to go and do their shopping, to go and send money to their families back in their countries. So they take, when we are able to bring them bikes, they take those bikes and they travel to Abbotsford. Sometimes they travel long ways, and they do their shopping and they come back in their bikes, and it's really great to see them coming back on their bikes. But it's also really sad because they should have support in doing this without, you know, all the work. They already work longer hours every day. Sometimes they can only go and do their shopping on Sunday afternoons, and this is when they take the opportunity to take their bikes and go and do their shopping. But you know, the program should have some principles in place so that farmers really take care of their workers and provide transportation for them to do this without having to take a bike to do that. But this is just a couple of pictures of us bringing bikes to workers, female workers, and also male workers in the farms, as you can see there. And this is something that we did in 2019. We had an end of the year party for the workers, and we had this on we did at Raycam, and we had this on the walls at Raycam, and just to raise also more awareness with workers on what we are working on as migrant organizations. So status for all, status upon arrival, that's what we're asking the government to give these workers if they are producing the food we eat, they should be having the right to apply for permanent residence or have permanent residence upon their arrival. And that will definitely not give the power to employers to abuse these workers if they had permanent residence. These workers pay for their pension. Their pension is taken every month from their checks. Many of them won't apply to that. They don't know how to, and most of the time they are sent to the countries, so it's difficult for them to do it there. So we were saying, not to work permits that are tied to their employer. That's one of the demands, status for all, and complete access to education and services. These workers don't have that access as well. So those are some of the demands. There's a migrant rights network working across the country with workers. These are some of the demands that we have out there right now. I'm also a member of Sanctuary Health, an organization here in Vancouver supporting people with precarious immigration status and agricultural migrant workers, and basically fighting for their rights. And so these are some of the demands that we have with the Migrants' Rights Network. And this is some of the work that we also do as Watari. This picture here is one of the health fairs that we were able to organize for agricultural migrant workers before the pandemic. So we used to do about 4 or 5 health fairs in the Fraser Valley and in the Lower Mainland. And we had workers come from all over. We also did a health fair in Victoria. And this is our community organizers working right now. These are urban migrants as well, struggling with a lot of the same things that agricultural migrants struggle. But during the pandemic, they have helped us cook food for the community in the downtown east side. So these are 2 of our community organizers going to the street to deliver food to people on Hastings. And these are some of the other things we do. We're connecting food with culture. We celebrate Day of the Dead at Watari. This is one of our long-term volunteers, Jesus, who unfortunately was killed at Oppenheimer Park in the beginning of 2020. We are naming our community garden as Strathcona after him. And these are some of this is Byron, my partner, and some of our amazing organizers who come and help us in our gardens. And this is a celebration of Day of the Dead, people breaking the piñata, kids having a lot of fun breaking the piñata there with music. So very much culture into food, and that's what we do. And there's a few of us here cooking for one of our health fairs for agricultural migrant workers. And one of our gardens, as you can see, one of our community organizers who come to help in our gardens is with her baby on the back, but still helping us with growing the food. Most of this food will go back into our community kitchens, community pots. And right now it's going back into our cooking for the community during the pandemic. And that's it. I'm just gonna see if I can stop sharing this. Thank you very much for the opportunity. And I hope that I was able to share something that people are more aware of, and especially around agricultural migrant workers and their struggles. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Ingrid. I really appreciate you sharing the work that Watari is doing I think especially right now during the pandemic, when there's so much highlighted about what frontline workers are doing for our communities. And, you know, we name a lot of healthcare workers, we name grocery store workers, and I think the people who are growing our food are often so invisibilized in the everyday, not just during the pandemic, but clearly during the pandemic, there's so many more ways that we're separated from one another and from being able to hear stories like this. So thank you.
Thank you.
And I really think that everything that Kage, Carmel, and Ingrid have shared with us really highlights some of these complexities that I was hoping to kind of get at in my introduction. We are going to be moving into a question and answer period. So I will prepared a few questions, but I encourage if you also have questions for Kage, Carmel, or Ingrid about their work to please kind of pop them in the chat. I think we will have the next 10 to 15 minutes to chat all together. And so I'm just, hopefully if Palstrit staff can pin us all together to appear on the screen so we can be more sort of looking at each other conversationally. That'd be great. We're limited on time, so I'm just going to remind our guests as well. If you don't have an answer or prefer not to answer, feel free to pass. We can take turns kind of answering questions. But one of the first questions that I have is, as we're talking about food and community and culture, I would love to hear if you have maybe like what your earliest memories are of food being used as a means for community building, whether that's in your home, with your faith community, with your cultural community, anything like that.
I'll start.
Great.
Probably this is before most of your time, but in the 70s, Tonarigumi used to do this live mochitsuki thing every January. I don't know if any of you remember, but it was basically the pounding of the rice. Now there are machines that make it, but traditionally the rice would be on a big sort of like wooden thing, and then there'll be these big, sorry, I don't know the names of these things, but they'd be pounded by two people, like pound, 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 and then a very skilled person would like stick their hand in and turn the rice in between the pounds. And then that would be done for a while, and then these will become like mochi for the New Year. So yeah, just wanted to say that. And can I get a show of hands of who remembers or attended those? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Kage. Carmel or Ingrid, do either of you have early
Sure.
memories?
I actually have a memory of when I realized my family really does use food to bring community together, and that isn't always the case with everyone else. I was it was a play date. I was in elementary school, and I think my mom was just a few minutes late to get me, and dinner was about to be served at this friend's house. And I was told to sit in the hallway and wait for my mom, that dinner was about to be served, and you can just let yourself out because this is dinner time. Now that would have been a super unheard of thing in my family. It's the complete opposite. It doesn't matter if we didn't have enough food, we would always pull up an extra seat just to include whoever was there. And I remember now as an adult looking back that the kids came with such hunger and were so excited to eat and to come and play at my place, and I never understood why they always wanted to play at my house. You know, I always wanted to play at their house, but then I realized it was the food. It was the good food.
Thank you. For me, I go back to being in primary school in Guatemala, and growing up, I grew up in a small a town called San Andrés Sacabaja, and my mother was one of the teachers. So food was always at the center of the discussion in class. And she also brought a lot of community garden into her work. So she was one of the first teachers who started hortalizas, we call them there, which is basically a community garden, and really teaching her kids, but also learning from the kids, because a lot of the traditions, so growing corn, growing beans, and growing squash which was one of the main foods that were growing there. So yeah, those are my favorite memories of, growing tomatoes and going to pick them in the garden, and cutting them and making salads that we were all sharing in class. And so incorporating a lot of the also benefits of nutrition and learning from that early age.
Can I jump in?
Oh, sure. I don't know whose voice that is.
It's Calvin.
Hi, Calvin. Yeah, great. Please ask a question.
I just like to put a plug in. David and I have been working on the third book of the series of that Tonani Gumi have completed. And this book is going to be called From the Sea and Shore, Favorite Steveston Recipes. We're just editing the recipes right now, and we hope to get to the publisher this summer. And hopefully in the fall, we'll have it up for sale. But one of the things that we're doing is trying to record some of the memories of our seniors. And a very strong memory from a lot of people is the availability of bento, homemade bento. And I remember going to Lord Byng School, elementary school sports day, and my mom, laying out the blanket, bringing out the bento. And usually it was a kind of an English cookie container that she, we didn't have the fancy bento boxes from Japan. And she would have the nigiri and the shoyu wieners and the tsukumono and the tamago yaki. And we would all share that lunch together while our Hakujin friends would go by, kind of giving us the, this look, because they were having the hot dogs, from the concession stand. So I tell those stories interspersed amongst the recipes. And we're hoping that it's going to be well received within the community as we share these sometimes odd recipes that the fishermen used to have here, and some of the more familiar ones.
Do you have a question, Kelvin? So right now we're just asking questions of our panelists, and we're going to go into the breakout rooms afterwards to share our own stories.
I just wanted to share that memory from the book about the bento lunches. So. Oh,
great. Okay. Well, I encourage people to share stories in the chat for now. I'd love, because we just have a short amount of time with our panelists, just to hear from them while we're all together. So we'll just keep focused on sharing some of their stories, and we'll have time to share more of our own plugs in the next round of chat. So my next question, I did see one question in the chat, which I'll get to, and it kind of connects to this. So during the pandemic, the idea of food security, and food insecurity has been really heightened, people hoarding food at home, certain rural communities having less access to foods, especially when the pandemic first started, there was a lot of fear. And I think that when we talk about food security, it's really relying upon a lot of the food systems that we're already part of, the corporate conglomerates of food stores, not a lot of things that we necessarily have a lot of power and control over sometimes. So my question, which is kind of a big question, but is moving beyond this idea of food security, what do you think a future of food sovereignty could look like? I think all of your work in a way contributes to people, reclaiming knowledge, building relationships. And so I'd love if any of you have thoughts, but it's also a big question that we could come back to.
Okay, I'll say something. Because this is the same thing I've been sort of trying to work out around community garden structure, and just if there's a way, I don't have an answer, but I think that there is this one model of like a communal garden, which is that there would be plots that wouldn't be owned by any one person, but a group of people that would work together to create their harvest and stuff. And yeah, I don't really have an answer, but I think that just how like when I started, how I started sort of wanting to grow my own food was because of climate change and food security stuff. So just ways that people can have resources to grow their own food that is not necessarily within the community garden model, because first of all, it's really hard to get a plot in the community garden. Takes sometimes years to be on a waiting list. And so, yeah, I don't really have much more to say, but something.
Thanks, Kage. I think I saw Ingrid, you're unmuting yourself too. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I think when we talk about food security and versus food sovereignty, I think food sovereignty really means including everyone who produces our food and doing it in a respectful way, having access to food with dignity, but also learning about the ways that our ancestors and indigenous people went around food, how the Mother Earth was respected in every time we were growing food, and being aware of where food comes from. You know, when I know that organizations get a lot of donations, but where are those donations coming from? And what does that really mean? Like, is any of those donations coming from the farms that are abusing agricultural migrant workers? And what does that mean when we accept those donations? What does it mean when we accept seeds for our community gardens that have a lot of, have been grown by people who were also being abused, or have been, you know, like also had a lot of fertilizers and a lot of chemicals that are damaging the land and are damaging our planet. I think when we talk about food sovereignty, we talk about everyone and each of us and how we can connect ourselves to food in different ways, rather than connecting with the capitalism ways. You know, like doing it from colonization, and what colonizers try to give us, and we have been resisting. Food sovereignty is also resisting the ways of colonizers. It's also resisting the ways of capitalism. Is working together as community, is supporting each other as community, and supporting our own ways and learning from each other on how to better harvest our food, how to better grow our food, and how to include each and everyone who grows food around us, and doing it in a respectful way, doing it with dignity.
Thanks, Ingrid. Unfortunately, Powell Street Fest staff are just reminding us that we're a bit behind schedule. So I think we're gonna have to maybe come back to some of this in the discussion kind of at the end when we have free time to chat. I think that I'm loving seeing all the answers in the chat. This is a great question, clearly, lots of knowledge. And there was also a question in the chat about connecting with Indigenous communities and Indigenous knowledge, which I think Ingrid just kind of mentioned, touching upon. Reclaiming ancestral knowledge and integrating it respectfully with the knowledge of knowledge keepers here on the lands that we live upon. I also really appreciated what you said, Ingrid, about relationships with one another. And I think that's what's really great about the next portion of our event, thinking about breakout groups and ways that all of us here today are going to engage in conversation with one another, because I think that these issues are, you know, really bigger than ourselves as individuals. And I think by building relationships, listening and sharing mutually is one way that we can start to think about how we can build alternatives and support one another and learn what we each need. So the Powell Street Festival staff will start, you'll be transported into, you'll see on your screen kind of an invitation to join a breakout room. We have a number of volunteer facilitators here today. Thank you so much to everyone who's volunteering to support a group, to lead questions through some of these conversations where we can hear about projects that people like Kelvin and David are working on to bring these stories to light. Because I think all of us here really do have knowledge about these subjects. Just a reminder that the facilitator will be keeping us on track of time and with questions. We encourage everyone to share as you feel comfortable. And afterwards, we will come back together to reconvene. And there will also be time to hang out and chat together in a more informal way. I realize that all of this is very structured. I guess the nature of just making sure we can move along in a good way. So that being said, in the next few minutes, you will see on your screen an invitation to join a chat group. But maybe as staff are kind of doing that, I know Carmel, you had unmuted yourself. I don't know if you have other things you want to share we can just chat about.
It's all good. Everything was said. The only thing I would have added is a little bit of a longer conversation, but it's through a cultural lens of how I know that a lot of people in my generation, especially in the JC community, are disconnected from our knowledge of what our ancestral foods are. And so I would be encouraging to, talk to our elders, learn, read, get to know. And I was very lucky to have an amazing garden in the current place that I live. And we made sure that we were planting plants that are native to this area and not bringing in other foods necessarily unless they were in potted plants, because we should be respecting the native plants that were here before us. So thank you.
Great. So Powell Street staff, I'm just wondering if people are going to be transported into breakout groups or how that process is going. Yeah, okay, seeing a nod. Okay, great. We are being invited into rooms. So you're going to see on your screen an invitation to join a room number, and you will all whoosh away.
So now we will, as a report back to the group, the facilitators will share their question. And of course, there were, I'm sure, lots of great questions, and we'll try to share those on our Facebook page and that kind of thing. Do we have everybody back now? I'm sorry. I think we just need to wait a little bit longer. And while we do that, I'm going to fix our question.
I think everybody's back.
Oh, okay. Okay. So then I'll start. Our question is, what can I grow on my balcony that matches the natural landscape and contributes to food security? I is next.
We had two questions that we weren't able to merge, so I'm going to add both questions here. And it was, how can we long for food that crosses borders while taking care of the land? And how can we share accessible foods for people living with disabilities? Thanks.
Thanks, I. And to keep the flow going, I'm not going to speak in between. I'll ask the facilitators just to, you see the order, just jump in and offer up your question.
Great, thanks, Emmy. So our group's question that we landed on is, what is it that we are sharing when we share food?
We had a question similar to I's question. We started thinking about all the different variables involved in deciding what we buy. And so our question was, how do we balance the nutritional, environmental, and ethical considerations in our food choices?
In my group, we had Michael Abe, Paul Okano, Eric, Mary, and myself. And the question that we decided to pose to the group is, what are some new food traditions that your family is creating?
Okay. Oh my God, where'd my question go to now? Hi, so my group was, how can food move and make community through its ability to bring comfort and healing and its power to transform shame to pride?
Sorry, can I actually pass? I'm trying to merge our questions. Can I go at the end, Emmy? My question's not quite ready, sorry.
Okay, so our group was with Takira and Nathan, and we came to the question, how can we build a relationship to food that is centered on meaning and relationships rather than scarcity?
And I had the pleasure of working with Group 10, which included Kage, Derek, Mieko, and myself. And our question is, as we engage in various gardening activities, how can we ensure and plan that we are giving as much as we're receiving from the land? Thank you.
Sammy, do you want to jump in?
Yes, thank you. Our group came up with the question, how can we facilitate opportunities to maintain cultural connection to our food and its sourcing?
So I'm just gonna list out a couple of the questions because they started bouncing off one another like lightning, and I think they go well together. So how can we stop wasting so much food and really become aware of the people who don't have the access that we have? Then right away it was, who is already doing this work? And then again, it was, how can we support these people and raise awareness about their work?
Yeah, I was actually really impressed by the liveliness of our discussion because we came up with how do we support elders through comfort food, and what resources do we have to help make that happen?
Our group's final question was, what is the history of Japanese Canadian chow mein?
Hi, my group was Vivian with Vivian Keiko, H, Kirsten, and Calvin. And these are interrelated questions. How can we support the land back in a good way? What are the politics of food production that connects us to other oppressed communities and ecology? How can we facilitate intergenerational connections so that our multisensory knowledges of food can be celebrated and passed down to the next generations?
Thank you, Izumi. Kathy, do you want to share?
My group was Naya, Angela, Emma, Haruho, and me, and we had a great discussion too. And I'm having trouble merging our questions, but I think how do we balance our similarities and differences and maintain nuance so that we can have discussions around place and belonging and the complexity of food as a more regular, everyday thing?
Thank you. Well, thank you all so much. Again, if you have more thoughts you want to share, you can send comments to info@Powell Street Festival or use the discussion board we've created on Facebook. Erica, Kage, Carmel, Ingrid, thank you for your presentations, your passion and knowledge really gave us a lot to think about. And for all the participants, and in my group, I should say that I failed to mention that I was with Keiko and I was with Sumter. We were a small group. And these questions we'll post as well. So the next time we gather, it's on March 27th, and we'll be talking about memory, myth making, and community resilience, and very much in this context of the pandemic and as a social disruption. For now, we're finished this conversation. We're going to keep the portal open and invite you all to hang out. Again, you don't have to, you can use the top right view and switch to gallery so you can see everybody. And Kage has something.
I have a question. Yeah, earlier, and I just couldn't answer. Somebody asked, they wanted to know if they can have the recipe for the red shiso syrup. So, so Derek and Atsumi, I see you're here. I know that I have the recipe somewhere. How do we, I mean, it's all over the internet. I believe the recipe that Atsumi engineered, who's right there, Atsumi, say hi, is kind of a country recipe. And I'm just not sure how to, I know it's not a secret, right? You have to unmute.
I'm sorry, I don't have a recipe offhand, but this is just tea. Think about tea. So you wash the red shiso leaves and then pour or cook in hot water, and then strength is your preference. And then we make it very thick and then put it in sugar. How much sugar, again, depend on you. And then vinegar, rice vinegar. And that's all. And then that syrup, you keep it in a fridge or freezer, and then you dilute it as your favorite sweetness. So this is all grandma's recipe. I was a city person, so I don't know. In Japan, I never heard about it. But this, when I look for this recipe on the web, then many said my grandmother's recipe. So it must be very local, how do you call, farmer's recipe, probably.
I can add the fact that it, one version of it, Hashimoto-san, came from Mariko Takashina, yes, and from Shikoku.